What if I told you that the very thing you're using to understand this sentence is still one of the greatest mysteries in the universe? The human brain, 3 pounds of soft, pulsating tissue, holds your thoughts, your dreams, your fears, and your identity. It's a living cosmos of billions of neurons firing in dazzling patterns, each moment crafting your sense of self and your experience of reality. But how does it do it? What secrets lie within this biological masterpiece? And what happens when we start decoding its deepest functions, rewriting its programming, or even trying to replicate it in machines? In this journey, we'll take you deep into the folds of the brain, from its ancient architecture to the bleeding edge of neuroscience and artificial intelligence. You'll uncover how memories are made and how emotions take root. You'll meet the hormones of love and the circuits of thought. You'll travel from dreams to data, from neurons to networks, and from philosophy to future tech. So put on your headphones, find a quiet moment, and let's explore the labyrinth of the human brain together. Because understanding your brain isn't just science, it's the key to understanding who you truly are. If you're fascinated by the mind and its infinite layers, subscribe to the channel for more immersive deep dives like this one. Don't forget to like the video and share it with someone curious. Your brain will thank you. Chapter 1: The Birth of Consciousness, From Cells to Sentience. From the dark, silent seas of Earth's primordial past, where chemical chaos brewed in warm tidal pools, emerged the earliest whispers of life. They were nothing more than self-replicating molecules. Fragments of complexity haphazardly formed through trial and error, guided not by thought or design but by the relentless arithmetic of evolution. And yet, from these primitive forms, microscopic, fragile, blind, would eventually rise the most intricate structure in the known universe, the human brain. This journey from chemical soup to self-awareness spans billions of years, bridging the divide between matter and mind. It began with cells. Simple, single-celled organisms that lived, moved, and replicated. Though devoid of a brain, they responded to their environments with remarkable sensitivity. They swam toward nutrients, recoiled from toxins, and clustered for protection. Even in their simplicity, they laid the groundwork for behavior. Behavior, rudimentary, reactive, would one day evolve into cognition as multicellularity took hold. Nature's blueprint grew more sophisticated. Some cells began to specialize. Some became muscle, others bone, and still others formed the first primitive nerve cells. These neurons, long and thread-like, communicated through chemical signals and electric pulses. The first nervous systems were basic, forming nerve nets in jellyfish and sea anemones. But these early innovations were crucial, offering speed and coordination, the building blocks of intelligence. By the time ancient fish appeared, some 500 million years ago, brains had begun to centralize and organize. The spinal cord formed, linking body to brainstem, and rudimentary brain regions evolved to handle sensory input and basic motor function. These early vertebrates had the ability to learn, to remember simple patterns, to adapt. The brain, no longer a passive relay station, had become an organ of prediction and control. Then came the explosion of brain complexity. Amphibians and reptiles introduced new cortical structures. Mammals refined emotional processing with the limbic system, and primates pushed the limits of cognition with an expanding neocortex. Every evolutionary step added layers of nuance, allowing animals not only to survive but to experience, to anticipate, and perhaps, eventually, to reflect. The human brain, emerging just a few million years ago, is the pinnacle of this journey. It weighs only about 3 pounds, but inside it are roughly 86 billion neurons, each forming thousands of connections. More possible connections than atoms in the known universe. This network gives rise to everything we are, our memories, our fears, our dreams, our sense of self. But how? How does flesh give rise to thought? How does biology birth consciousness? That question, how consciousness emerges, remains one of the greatest mysteries of science and philosophy. Some theories argue it's an emergent property, arising from the sheer complexity of neural interactions. Others propose it's rooted in quantum processes within microtubules of neurons. And still others suspect consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe, like space or time, and not something the brain generates but something it tunes into, like a radio receiver. Whatever its source, consciousness did not spring into existence fully formed. It evolved. It unfolded gradually. Our ancestors, early hominins like Australopithecus and Homo habilis, likely possessed some form of awareness. A sense of pain, fear, curiosity. But over time, this awareness deepened. Homo erectus made tools, hunted in groups, perhaps even communicated with rudimentary language. And with Homo sapiens, a cognitive leap occurred, symbolic thought, imagination, abstract reasoning. We painted on cave walls, buried our dead, gazed at stars and wondered. Consciousness today is no longer a mystery locked in biology alone. It has become a crossroads between disciplines. Neuroscience seeks to map its neural correlates. Psychology studies its behaviors and perceptions. Philosophy probes its essence. Artificial intelligence mimics it. Spirituality contemplates its origins. And yet, for all our advances, we still struggle to define it. We cannot say with certainty what it is, only what it does. How it lets us feel the warmth of sunlight, hear the melancholy of a cello, or remember the touch of someone long gone. It is, perhaps, the greatest paradox of our existence, that the brain, a lump of flesh, pink and wet and silent, gives rise to an inner universe of thoughts, sensations, and dreams. That from cells came sentience. And that the story of our brain is not only a biological tale, but a deeply human one, written across the ages in the language of evolution, experience, and wonder. Chapter 2, Inside the Skull, Mapping the Human Brain. Beneath the protective dome of the human skull lies a 3-pound masterpiece, an organ so intricate that even with modern science's most advanced tools, we are only beginning to comprehend its inner workings. The human brain is not a uniform mass but a delicately structured landscape, with hills and valleys of neural tissue arranged in distinct regions, each specialized for particular functions. Like a city lit at night, different neighborhoods of the brain flicker with activity depending on what we think, feel, or do. Understanding this map is like unlocking the control center of the self. At the most basic level, the brain is divided into 3 principal regions: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. The cerebrum, the largest part, is what we typically picture when we think of the brain, folded, wrinkled, and split into 2 hemispheres. Each hemisphere governs the opposite side of the body, and together, they are responsible for higher-order thinking, decision-making, emotion, language, and memory. The cerebellum, smaller and tucked beneath the cerebrum, governs balance and fine motor control. The brainstem, connecting brain to spinal cord, handles the essentials: heartbeat, breathing, digestion, and the autonomic rhythms of life. Delving deeper into the cerebrum, we encounter the cerebral cortex, the outermost layer, just a few millimeters thick but packed with neurons. It is here that most conscious thought occurs. The cortex is divided into 4 lobes, each with its own distinct role. The frontal lobe is the seat of reason, planning, and personality. It allows us to consider consequences, suppress impulses, and imagine the future. The parietal lobe integrates sensory information, touch, temperature, pain, and helps us perceive our body in space. The occipital lobe, at the back of the head, is dedicated to vision. The temporal lobe, near the ears, processes sound, language, and memory. Within the folds of these lobes lie specialized zones. Broca's area, for example, is crucial for speech production, while Wernicke's area handles comprehension. The motor cortex sends signals to muscles, commanding movement. The somatosensory cortex receives input from the skin, allowing us to feel texture, heat, and pain. Each of these regions has been painstakingly identified through decades of brain imaging, injury studies, and electrical stimulation, yet many mysteries remain. Deeper still, beneath the cortex, is the limbic system. The emotional brain. This ancient structure includes the amygdala, which governs fear and aggression, and the hippocampus, vital for forming memories. The hypothalamus maintains homeostasis, controlling hunger, thirst, sleep, and body temperature. It also directs the pituitary gland, linking brain to endocrine system and regulating hormones. These inner structures form the bridge between the raw instincts of our evolutionary past and the refined cognition of our modern mind. The brain's hemispheres are connected by a thick band of fibers called the corpus callosum, which enables communication between both sides. Contrary to popular myth, people do not use just one hemisphere at a time, nor do we use only 10% of our brains. The entire brain is active, constantly, even when we sleep. However, some functions are lateralized. Language, for example, is typically processed in the left hemisphere, while spatial and visual processing tends to favor the right. Beyond its structural divisions, the brain operates through networks, circuits of neurons that fire together to perform specific tasks. The default mode network is active when our mind is at rest, daydreaming or recalling memories. The salience network helps us focus on what matters in the moment. The executive network manages attention and goal-directed behavior. These networks are not fixed territories but dynamic, overlapping systems, lighting up and fading in response to our every thought, action, and emotion. Modern tools like fMRI and PET scans have revolutionized our understanding of brain activity, allowing scientists to visualize which areas activate during specific tasks. But even with this technology, the brain remains elusive. Two people can perform the same task using slightly different pathways. Brains are not identical blueprints, they are shaped by genetics, experience, and plasticity. Your brain is uniquely yours, sculpted by your life. To map the brain is not merely to trace anatomy, but to glimpse the geography of thought itself. It is a journey through the terrain of memory, language, feeling, and selfhood. As science continues to explore this inner world, we edge closer to understanding the very architecture of our minds, an atlas not just of flesh and neuron, but of consciousness itself. Chapter 3: Neurons, Synapses, and Electric Thought. At the heart of the brain's incredible complexity lies the humble neuron, a specialized cell designed not for motion or metabolism, but for thought. The neuron is the brain's basic building block, its smallest unit of communication, and it forms the living circuitry through which all mental activity flows. With nearly 86 billion neurons densely packed within the human brain, and each one forming up to 10,000 connections with others, the number of possible pathways is greater than the number of stars in the galaxy. This web of connections is what allows us to think, feel, learn, and remember. A neuron consists of three main parts: the cell body, or soma, which contains the nucleus and maintains the cell's health, the dendrites, which receive signals from other neurons, and the axon, a long, slender projection that transmits signals to other neurons. At the tip of the axon are axon terminals, which do not physically touch the next neuron but instead hover close to its dendrites across a microscopic gap called the synapse. This is where one of biology's most astonishing processes occurs. When a neuron is activated, by a sensory input, a memory, a thought, it generates an electrical impulse called an action potential. This impulse travels down the axon like a wave of electricity, triggered by the movement of charged ions across the cell membrane. The signal races at incredible speeds, depending on the neuron's type and insulation. Some are sheathed in myelin, a fatty coating that boosts signal transmission, allowing impulses to leap between gaps called nodes of Ranvier. This system enables rapid communication across vast distances within the brain and body. But the real magic happens at the synapse. When the electrical signal reaches the end of the axon, it cannot leap across the synaptic gap on its own. Instead, it triggers the release of chemical messengers known as neurotransmitters. These molecules drift across the synapse and bind to receptors on the receiving neuron's dendrites. If the signal is strong enough, the receiving neuron will fire its own action potential, continuing the chain of communication. This process happens millions of times every second, forming the foundation of all neural activity. There are dozens of known neurotransmitters, each with different effects. Dopamine is associated with reward, motivation, and movement. Serotonin influences mood, sleep, and appetite. Acetylcholine plays a key role in learning and memory. Glutamate is the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter, while GABA is its main inhibitory one, providing a necessary balance between stimulation and calm. The precise mixture of neurotransmitters, receptors, and neural pathways determines how we experience the world. Neurons do not work in isolation. They form networks, vast, interconnected circuits that process information, regulate behavior, and give rise to consciousness itself. Some networks are localized, such as those in the visual cortex or motor strip. Others are distributed, involving multiple brain regions working in synchrony. These circuits can be shaped and reshaped by experience, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. With practice, the brain rewires itself, strengthening some pathways, pruning others, and adapting to new challenges. This ability to change is what allows us to learn a language, master a skill, or recover after injury. The sheer complexity of neural communication is staggering. One moment of thought or memory involves millions of neurons firing in precise patterns. It is not just the presence of a signal that matters, but its timing, rhythm, and intensity. Brain waves, patterns of electrical activity measured by EEG, reveal how neurons oscillate together in synchrony, forming the neural soundtrack of our mental states. Alpha waves dominate when we are calm and relaxed. Beta waves rise during focus and problem solving. Theta and delta waves occur in sleep. These rhythms are not noise, they are the signature of organized, intelligent thought. Yet even the most advanced neuroscience cannot fully explain how these electrochemical signals become subjective experience. How does the firing of neurons create the sensation of color, the taste of coffee, the ache of grief? This is the so-called hard problem of consciousness. We can trace the path of a signal through the brain, but we still cannot pinpoint where experience begins. What we do know is that it all begins with neurons. The tiny messengers that whisper, spark, and connect, composing the silent symphony of thought. Each thought you have ever had, every memory you hold, every plan you form, is the result of countless neurons sending signals across delicate bridges of synapses. It is a process so fast and fluid that we rarely notice it happening, yet without it, there would be no self, no story, no soul. In the language of the brain, these fleeting bursts of energy are everything. They are what make us alive, aware, and endlessly capable of change. Chapter 4, Memory, the Architecture of Time. Memory is the thread that weaves our lives into a continuous narrative. It is the mechanism by which we remember who we are, where we've been, and what we've learned. Without memory, there would be no past to recall and no future to plan, only a series of disconnected moments, vanishing as quickly as they arrive. Memory allows us to inhabit time, to relive joy, to learn from pain, and to carry knowledge forward like fire through the ages. It is not a simple storage system but a dynamic, living architecture that reshapes itself constantly. At its core, memory is the ability to encode, store, and retrieve information. But this process is not singular or centralized, it unfolds across multiple systems and stages. Psychologists divide memory into three broad types: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory is ultra-brief, holding raw data from the senses for just a few seconds. Short-term memory, often equated with working memory, holds a limited amount of information temporarily, like a mental notepad for immediate tasks. Long-term memory is more enduring, storing everything from your first day of school to the meaning of the word gravity. Each of these memory systems relies on different parts of the brain. The hippocampus, nestled deep within the temporal lobe, plays a central role in the formation of new long-term memories. When we experience something new, the hippocampus helps encode that information and relay it for storage elsewhere in the brain, often in the cortex. Damage to the hippocampus, as in the famous case of patient HM, can result in an inability to form new memories, a condition called anterograde amnesia. He could remember his past, but not the present. Trapped in an endless loop of now. Long-term memory itself can be divided into explicit and implicit memory. Explicit memory, also known as declarative memory, is the conscious recollection of facts and events. It includes semantic memory, general knowledge like the capital of France, and episodic memory, personal experiences like your last birthday. Implicit memory, on the other hand, operates beneath the surface. It includes procedural memory. The skills and habits we perform without thinking, like riding a bicycle or typing a password. Even people with severe amnesia can retain procedural skills, showing that memory is not one thing but many. Memories are not stored in the brain like files in a cabinet. They are distributed across neural networks, with fragments encoded in the same areas that processed the original experience. A memory of a beach might be stored as sights in the visual cortex, sounds in the auditory cortex, and emotions in the amygdala. When we recall that beach, the brain reactivates these regions in unison, reconstructing the memory as a living experience. This is why a single smell or sound can instantly transport us across years. Memory is not static, but sensory and emotional. But memory is also fallible. It fades, warps, and distorts. We forget names, misremember faces, and sometimes recall things that never happened. This is because memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. Each time we recall an event, we rebuild it from scratch, and in doing so, we may alter it. Emotion, suggestion, and bias can all shape what we remember and how we remember it. This is why eyewitness testimony can be unreliable and why nostalgia can make the past seem sweeter than it was. Despite its imperfections, memory is remarkably adaptive. It allows us to learn from experience, adapt to new environments, and make better choices. The brain even prioritizes emotional memories, tagging them as significant. The amygdala, which processes fear and pleasure, enhances the storage of emotional events, ensuring we remember moments of joy or trauma with greater clarity. This mechanism evolved to help us survive, remember what is dangerous, cherish what is precious. Modern neuroscience is beginning to uncover the physical basis of memory, how synaptic changes, protein synthesis, and even gene expression contribute to long-term storage. This process, known as long-term potentiation, strengthens the connection between neurons that fire together frequently. In this way, repetition literally rewires the brain, making pathways more efficient. It is the neural foundation of learning, habit, and personal transformation. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about memory is its power to preserve the self. Your memories are your identity, your experiences, your knowledge, your sense of continuity. When memory begins to fail, as in dementia, the erosion of identity can be heartbreaking. A person may remain physically present, but their sense of self slowly slips away. In this sense, memory is not just a function, it is a lifeline to meaning. To explore memory is to explore the architecture of time itself. It reveals how the past lives within us, how the present is informed by experience, and how the future is shaped by what we choose to carry forward. Every memory you hold is a map, a mirror, a seed. It is the quiet evidence that you have lived, that you have felt, and that you continue to grow. Chapter 5: Emotion and the Limbic Symphony. Emotion floods the human experience with color, urgency, and meaning. It sharpens memory, guides decision-making, forges bonds, and warns of danger. Without emotion, life would be a flat landscape, informational but empty, yet with it, every experience acquires weight. The brain systems that generate, shape, and regulate our emotional lives are ancient, layered, and dynamic, and together they form what is often called the limbic system, though modern neuroscience shows that emotion is not confined to one anatomical box but emerges from networks spanning cortex, subcortex, body, and environment. Still, the metaphor of a symphony is useful. Different brain structures act like sections of an orchestra: strings, brass, percussion, rising and falling in intensity to score the moment-to-moment music of feeling. At the emotional center stage sits the amygdala, two almond-shaped structures buried deep in the medial temporal lobes that act as rapid detection hubs for biologically salient stimuli, especially threat, but also reward. The amygdala can respond to potential danger before conscious awareness fully forms, priming the body for action through fast routes to the hypothalamus and brainstem. Yet to call it a fear center is too simple. The amygdala helps assign emotional significance, valence and intensity, to incoming sensory information, contributing not only to fear but to learning, attention, and even social evaluation. In emotional conditioning experiments, the amygdala helps pair stimuli with outcomes, creating powerful learned responses that can persist for years. Close to the amygdala lies the hippocampus, the memory engine that encodes context, where, when, and under what conditions an event occurred. Emotion and memory intertwine here. A frightening experience stamped with amygdala activation will be more strongly consolidated by hippocampal cortical networks, making emotionally charged memories vivid, persistent, and influential. This pairing serves survival. Remember the valley where the predator lurked, remember the face of the ally who helped you escape, remember the fire-lit meal that meant safety. When trauma overwhelms this system, memory may fragment, surfacing later as flashbacks or intrusive images, showing how emotional intensity can modulate not just strength but stability of recall. Beneath these temporal structures sits the hypothalamus, small but mighty, orchestrating the body's internal state in response to emotional demands. When the brain judges a situation threatening, the hypothalamus triggers the fight-or-flight cascade, activating the sympathetic nervous system, increasing heart rate, dilating pupils, mobilizing glucose, and, through the HPA axis, initiating cortisol release from the adrenal glands. These hormonal tides shape what we feel in the body: tension, heat, breathlessness, gut churn. Because emotion is always embodied, the hypothalamus acts as a conductor linking subjective feeling to physiological change. Another vital contributor to the emotional ensemble is the insula, a folded region tucked deep within the lateral sulcus. The insula monitors internal bodily signals, heartbeat, gut state, breath, and integrates them into conscious feeling states. Many researchers see it as a hub of interoception, the sense of the body from within. Feelings such as disgust, craving, anxiety, or empathy for another's pain often involve insular activation. When we say we have a gut feeling, the insula is part of the translation layer between body data and emotional awareness. The anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, adds nuance and regulation. Functionally diverse, the ACC helps monitor conflict, track errors, and register the distress of both physical and social pain. Social rejection activates some of the same neural pathways associated with bodily pain, underscoring that emotional hurt is not a metaphor but a neural reality. The ACC also participates in top-down modulation, shifting attention, reappraising meaning, and dampening emotional reactivity when context demands restraint. Emotion is not only about threat and avoidance, it is also about reward, motivation, and pleasure. Enter the mesolimbic dopamine system, the ventral tegmental area, VTA, nucleus accumbens, and associated cortical loops. When something signals potential reward, food, novelty, social approval, achievement, dopamine neurons surge, teaching the brain what to pursue. Anticipation often delivers a stronger dopamine signal than the reward itself, driving motivation and goal-seeking behavior. This system underlies habit formation, addiction vulnerability, curiosity, and the joy of learning. In the emotional symphony, dopamine is the rising swell of expectation, the drumroll before the payoff. These subcortical systems do not act alone. The prefrontal cortex, especially medial and ventrolateral regions, interfaces with limbic structures to shape emotional responses in light of goals, rules, and social norms. Reappraisal, maybe they're not ignoring me, they're just busy, suppression, attentional redirection, and cognitive reframing all rely on prefrontal limbic dialogue. Healthy emotion regulation depends on flexible top-down control, feeling the wave, recognizing it, and choosing how to surf rather than drown. Disruptions in these pathways are implicated in mood disorders, anxiety, impulsivity, and stress reactivity. Hormones layer additional modulation over neural activity. Cortisol mobilizes energy under stress but can impair memory and mood when chronically elevated. Oxytocin, associated with bonding, childbirth, and trust, can enhance social connection but also sharpen in-group boundaries. Vasopressin contributes to social behaviors, territoriality, and pair bonding in some species. Sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, interact with neurotransmitter systems to shape mood cycles, motivation, and libido. Emotional tone is thus partly a hormonal landscape, shifting across days, seasons, and life stages. Emotion development begins early. Infants arrive equipped with basic affective responses, distress, pleasure, surprise, but refine them through caregiver interaction. Secure attachment teaches emotional safety, I am seen, soothed, and therefore I can explore. Repeated co-regulation between infant and caregiver gradually becomes self-regulation as prefrontal circuits mature. Language gives names to feelings, culture gives scripts, and social learning teaches when and how to express anger, joy, fear, or shame. Emotional style is sculpted, biology supplies the instruments, experience teaches the score. Culture profoundly shapes emotional life. While certain facial expressions and affective reactions appear cross-culturally recognizable, cultures differ in which emotions are valued, how strongly they are expressed, and which internal states are noticed or ignored. Some cultures encourage open grief, others emphasize stoicism. Some name emotions that have no single-word equivalent elsewhere, like the Portuguese saudade or the Japanese ame, expanding the palette of experience. The brain's plasticity allows cultural practice to tune emotional circuits over a lifetime. Music, storytelling, ritual, and art can move us to tears without threatening our survival or feeding our bodies. Why? Because emotional systems evolve to assign meaning and value to patterns that matter for connection. Music exploits timing, expectation, dissonance, and resolution to recruit reward and social bonding circuits. Storytelling activates empathy networks, inviting us to feel what characters feel. Ritual synchronizes bodies and emotions across groups, strengthening identity and trust. The limbic symphony is not purely individual, it can be orchestrated collectively. When emotional circuits become dysregulated, suffering follows. Anxiety disorders amplify threat detection, keeping the amygdala on high alert. Depression can dampen reward responsiveness, alter sleep, bias memory toward the negative, and disrupt prefrontal regulation. Bipolar disorder swings mood circuits between elevated and depressed states. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, embeds fear conditioning so deeply that harmless cues trigger full survival responses. These conditions are not moral failings, they are patterns in brain-body networks that can, with treatment, be influenced, rebalanced, and sometimes remapped. Therapies for emotional disorders often work by reshaping limbic cortical communication. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, trains reappraisal and exposure, gradually teaching the brain that feared stimuli are safe. Mindfulness practices strengthen meta-awareness, observing feelings without being consumed by them, altering activity in insula and prefrontal regions. Medications adjust neurotransmitter availability, easing symptoms enough for learning to occur. Emerging treatments like psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy may transiently relax rigid network dynamics, allowing emotional memory to be revisited and integrated in new ways. Empathy, compassion, and moral emotion extend the limbic symphony into the social realm. Seeing another in pain can trigger insular and ACC activity as if we ourselves were hurting. Mirror systems and theory of mind networks help us model the feelings and intentions of others, enabling cooperation, caregiving, and culture. Moral outrage, gratitude, guilt, pride, these social emotions bind communities, regulate behavior, and transmit values across generations. Emotion, then, is not only personal, it is civilization's glue. In everyday life, you can feel the limbic symphony working in subtle transitions. A tightness in the chest before speaking in public, warmth spreading when a friend smiles, a burst of alertness when a shape in peripheral vision seems out of place. Each sensation reflects rapid pattern detection, hormonal adjustment, and meaning assignment shaped by history, context, and culture. Learning to notice these waves, naming them, regulating them, channeling them, turns raw emotion into emotional intelligence. When we step back, the limbic symphony reveals something profound. Emotion is not noise interfering with rational thought, it is the valuation system that tells thought what matters. Without emotion, reason has no compass. With balanced emotion, we learn, connect, create, and survive. The music of the limbic brain scores every chapter of our lives, from first cry to final memory, and learning to listen to it closely is one of the deepest forms of self-understanding. Chapter 6, Dreams, the Theater of the Subconscious. Each night, as the waking world fades and the body succumbs to sleep, the mind slips into a state of boundless imagination. In dreams, time dissolves, physics bends, the dead speak, and memories rearrange themselves into surreal tapestries. We run without moving, we fall without landing, we speak languages we never learned. Dreams are the great paradox of consciousness, untethered from logic, yet meaningful, ephemeral, yet deeply emotional. For centuries, they've been seen as prophecies, puzzles, reflections of the soul. But what are they really? Are dreams random neural fireworks or messages from the depths of the mind? Modern science has come closer than ever to understanding dreams, though mystery still clings to their edges. We know that dreaming is most vivid during REM, rapid eye movement, sleep, a phase that recurs in cycles throughout the night. During REM, the brain becomes nearly as active as when awake. The eyes dart beneath closed lids, the heart rate rises, and most voluntary muscles become temporarily paralyzed, a protective measure to prevent us from physically acting out our dreams. It is in this stage that the theater of the subconscious reaches full bloom. But dreams can occur in other stages of sleep as well, particularly during the lighter phases of non-REM sleep. These dreams are often less vivid, more thought-like, but they still carry emotional and narrative weight. As sleep cycles repeat, dreams grow longer and more complex. In a full night's sleep, a person may have 4 to 6 dream episodes, each reflecting a different internal world shaped by memory, emotion, and desire. One of the earliest scientific theories of dreaming was put forward by Sigmund Freud, who believed dreams were disguised expressions of unconscious wishes. In the interpretation of dreams, Freud argued that dream content had 2 layers. The manifest content, or the literal storyline, and the latent content, or the hidden psychological meaning. While Freud's symbolic interpretations have fallen out of favor in neuroscience, his insight, that dreams are deeply tied to emotion, repression, and identity, still resonates in modern research. Carl Jung, Freud's student and later rival, saw dreams as the language of the unconscious mind, rich in archetypes and collective symbols. To Jung, dreams were not just wish fulfillment but a way for the psyche to communicate with itself, to restore balance, and to guide personal growth. He believed recurring dream figures represented universal aspects of human nature, the shadow, the anima, the wise old man. Whether or not one subscribes to Jung's mythology, his emphasis on dreams as meaningful, not random, continues to influence dream therapy today. Neuroscientific approaches have reframed the conversation. One influential theory is the activation synthesis hypothesis, proposed by Hobson and McCarley in the 1970s. They suggested that during REM sleep, the brainstem sends bursts of random activity to the cortex, which then attempts to make sense of this chaos by weaving it into a coherent narrative, a dream. In this view, dreams are the mind's attempt to impose order on internal noise. They may not mean anything specific, but they still reflect the brain's deep need to make sense of experience. More recent theories propose that dreams serve essential cognitive and emotional functions. The threat simulation theory, for example, suggests that dreams evolved as a form of rehearsal, allowing early humans to simulate dangers, navigate social conflicts, and refine survival strategies in a safe virtual environment. This theory is supported by the fact that negative emotions, like fear, anxiety, and confusion, are common in dreams, and dream content often includes themes of pursuit, failure, or vulnerability. Another idea is that dreaming helps consolidate memory and learning. Studies have shown that people who are deprived of REM sleep have trouble retaining new information. During sleep, particularly REM sleep, the brain appears to reactivate and reorganize recent experiences, strengthening neural connections and transferring short-term memories into long-term storage. Dream content often reflects fragments of the day's events, recombined in strange and unexpected ways. This suggests that the dreaming brain is not idle, but actively working to process life. Emotional regulation may be another key function of dreaming. The amygdala, the brain's emotional center, is highly active during REM sleep, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic and self-control, is subdued. This imbalance may allow us to re-experience and reprocess intense emotions in a low-stakes environment. Traumatic experiences, unresolved grief, lingering shame, these often find symbolic form in dreams, giving the mind a second chance to cope. Lucid dreams, where the dreamer becomes aware they are dreaming, can sometimes offer direct access to this emotional workshop. There is also a cultural layer to dreams. In some indigenous traditions, dreams are seen as spiritual journeys, ways of receiving wisdom from ancestors or the spirit world. In ancient Egypt, dreams were considered divine messages, and priests served as interpreters. In modern times, dream journaling, lucid dreaming techniques, and dream therapy are used to explore the inner self and unlock creative insight. Artists, writers, and inventors often credit dreams for breakthroughs. Paul McCartney dreamed the melody of "Yesterday." The structure of the benzene molecule was revealed to Friedrich Kekulé in a dream of a snake biting its own tail. Despite all we know, many mysteries remain. Why are some dreams so emotionally intense, while others vanish upon waking? Why do certain people rarely remember their dreams, while others recall them in vivid detail? Why do we dream about places we've never seen, people we barely know, or worlds that defy all logic? These questions remind us that dreams occupy a liminal space between biology and imagination, between science and myth. The dream world is ephemeral, impossible to capture, often difficult to describe. Yet within it lies the raw material of the psyche, our fears, our desires, our memories, our creativity. When we dream, we become playwright, actor, and audience all at once. The brain generates not only the setting, the story, and the characters, but the meaning as well. It is perhaps the most intimate form of storytelling, one we do not choose, but that still reflects who we are. In this private theater of the subconscious, the mind rehearses, rewinds, reimagines. It reminds us that even in sleep, we are not silent. We are speaking to ourselves in the language of symbol and sensation, and whether we understand it or not, that language shapes us. Chapter 7, The Plastic Mind, How We Change Ourselves. For many centuries, the human brain was thought to be fixed and rigid, a kind of biological machine whose components once set in place could not be altered. This belief, though persistent and pervasive, could not have been more incorrect. The truth is that the brain is astonishingly adaptable, constantly remodeling itself in response to experience, environment, learning, and even injury. This quality, known as neuroplasticity, is one of the most revolutionary discoveries in modern neuroscience. It changes not only how we understand the mind, but how we understand ourselves, our capacity for transformation, and the nature of our personal growth over a lifetime. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. These changes can occur at the level of individual neurons as they forge new synaptic connections, or at the broader level of entire networks and brain regions shifting their roles and priorities. This means that experiences, whether as small as reading a book or as profound as learning to walk again after a stroke, can physically reshape the brain's structure. For example, London taxi drivers, who must memorize the complex maze of the city streets, show significantly larger hippocampi, the area responsible for spatial navigation, than average drivers. This isn't genetic destiny, but brain plasticity at work, sculpting itself to meet the demands of life. The implications of neuroplasticity are immense. It means that we are not prisoners of our biology. With effort, repetition, and intention, we can rewire destructive habits, improve cognitive abilities, and even recover lost functions. For stroke survivors, for instance, regions of the brain unaffected by the stroke can gradually assume the roles of the damaged areas through therapy and consistent training. In children, the plasticity of the brain is especially pronounced, allowing for incredible feats of adaptation. But even in adults, though slightly reduced, the capacity to change never disappears. Learning a new language, practicing a musical instrument, or simply challenging oneself to think differently, all activate this neural flexibility. Yet neuroplasticity is not always a blessing. Just as positive behaviors and skills can be reinforced, so too can negative patterns. Addictions, obsessive thoughts, and destructive habits all become hardwired in the brain through the same process. This darker side of plasticity means that the brain doesn't inherently distinguish between what is good or bad for us. It simply follows the paths we carve into it through repetition and emotion. In this way, the brain becomes a mirror, reflecting the life we lead and the choices we make. Modern therapies are now harnessing the power of plasticity with remarkable results. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, for example, encourages patients to challenge their thought patterns, effectively rewiring their emotional responses. Mindfulness meditation has been shown to strengthen the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought, while quieting the amygdala, which governs fear. These changes are not abstract. They are visible on brain scans, measurable in function, and transformative in experience. They represent the new frontier of healing, one where the mind is no longer seen as static, but as a dynamic process of becoming. As research continues, scientists are beginning to explore ways to enhance neuroplasticity pharmacologically and technologically. Nootropics, drugs that enhance cognitive performance, may one day accelerate learning and adaptation. Brain-computer interfaces could potentially direct neural growth. And techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation are already being used to nudge the brain toward healthier patterns. These developments suggest a future where not only healing but enhancement may become a regular part of the human journey. In the end, neuroplasticity offers a profound truth, that change is not only possible, it is fundamental to who we are. The brain, far from being fixed, is a living system of endless potential. Our thoughts, our actions, our hopes and dreams. They leave physical imprints on our biology. We are, in a very real sense, the authors of our own mental architecture. The plastic mind is the evidence that we are not simply shaped by life, we shape ourselves in return. Chapter 8, Consciousness, the Mystery of Awareness. What does it mean to be conscious? This is perhaps the most profound and mysterious question in all of neuroscience and philosophy. Consciousness is the light of the mind. The awareness we have of ourselves, our thoughts, our surroundings, and our place in the world. It is the inner movie that plays behind our eyes, the narrator of our story, the presence that experiences everything and questions everything. And yet, for all its centrality to human existence, consciousness remains one of the least understood phenomena in science. At its core, consciousness refers to the state of being aware of and able to think about one's own existence, sensations, thoughts, and environment. But this definition, while functional, barely scratches the surface. Consciousness is not a single process but a constellation of processes: attention, perception, self-reflection, and subjective experience, all woven together seamlessly. Unlike other functions of the brain, like motor control or language, consciousness has no single location, no single circuit. It is a dynamic emergent property arising from the coordination of many different brain regions. The cerebral cortex plays a starring role in consciousness, especially the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for higher-order thinking and self-reflection. But it doesn't act alone. The thalamus, a structure deep in the brain that relays sensory information to the cortex, appears to act like a switchboard, helping regulate the flow of conscious experience. Damage to specific regions of the thalamus can result in profound unconscious states, such as coma or vegetative states, underscoring its role in maintaining awareness. The question of how brain activity gives rise to conscious experience is known as the hard problem of consciousness, a term coined by philosopher David Chalmers. The easy problems of neuroscience, like explaining how the brain processes visual information or controls the body, are challenging but ultimately solvable. The hard problem asks something deeper. How do electrochemical signals, firing neurons, and networks of cells create the vivid, subjective experience of seeing red, feeling joy, or thinking about the future? Why is there a felt quality to any of it at all? Various theories attempt to explain this. One influential framework is the global workspace theory, which suggests that consciousness arises when information is broadcast widely across the brain's networks. In this view, consciousness is like a spotlight in a theater. It illuminates one actor, or thought or perception, at a time while keeping others in the wings. Another idea is integrated information theory, IIT, which argues that consciousness corresponds to the degree of integration of information in the brain. The more richly interconnected a system is, the more it processes information in a unified, complex way, the more conscious it is. Both theories suggest that consciousness isn't binary, it comes in degrees. This has important implications for understanding altered states of consciousness. During deep sleep or anesthesia, integration and broadcasting are reduced, leading to unconsciousness. In contrast, during dreaming or psychedelic states, integration might be high but chaotic, giving rise to unusual forms of consciousness that feel both real and surreal. Even in waking life, our level of consciousness can vary moment by moment depending on focus, emotion, and alertness. The study of consciousness also intersects with the study of self. The brain constructs a model of the self, your body, your thoughts, your history, your place in the world. This self-model is remarkably stable, but it can be disrupted. In certain neurological or psychiatric conditions, like dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, or depersonalization disorder, the sense of self can fragment or vanish. Brain imaging studies show that regions like the default mode network are heavily involved in maintaining this inner narrative, linking past, present, and future into a coherent story that feels like you. Furthermore, the boundaries of consciousness are being tested with the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Can a machine ever be conscious? If consciousness is the result of information processing, could a sufficiently advanced AI become self-aware? Or is there something fundamentally biological, even metaphysical, about human consciousness that can never be replicated by circuits and code? These are no longer just science fiction questions, they are at the frontier of philosophy, neuroscience, and ethics. Despite decades of study, no single brain scan, electrical signature, or neural pattern can definitively identify consciousness. And yet, we know when it's there, and when it's gone. A patient emerging from a coma, a lucid dreamer realizing they're asleep, a meditating monk observing the rise and fall of thoughts, these are all glimpses into the vast and variable terrain of conscious experience. Even newborn babies, animals, and possibly other non-human organisms display elements of awareness, challenging our assumptions about the uniqueness of human consciousness. Ultimately, consciousness may not be something the brain has, but something the brain does, a verb, not a noun. It is the dynamic, ongoing process of experiencing, integrating, and responding to the world. Though the hard problem remains, each scientific advance brings us a step closer to understanding this elusive essence that defines our waking life. In studying consciousness, we are not just studying the brain, we are gazing into the mirror of existence itself. Chapter 9: The Mind-Body Connection, Nerves, Hormones, and Illusions. The boundary between the brain and the body is an illusion as deceptive as any trick of the mind. For centuries, the brain was viewed as the sovereign ruler of thought and consciousness, a command center disconnected from the pulsing, aching, living tissues it resides within. But neuroscience, endocrinology, and psychophysiology have shown us otherwise. The brain does not simply control the body, it is shaped by it, responds to it, depends upon it. The line between mental and physical health has proven to be porous, with one influencing the other in intricate, invisible ways. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every decision you make echoes through your body as a physical signal, a cascade of chemicals, a shift in posture, a tremor of tension. And likewise, the state of your body, your gut, your muscles, your hormones, reverberates into your brain as sensation, impulse, and even belief. At the center of this exchange is the nervous system. Stretching from the brain down through the spinal cord and branching out to every organ, gland, and limb, the nervous system forms a vast electrical communication network. It is both sender and receiver. The autonomic nervous system, which controls involuntary functions like heartbeat, digestion, and respiration, is split into two main branches. The sympathetic system, which triggers the body's fight-or-flight response, and the parasympathetic system, which governs rest and restoration. These branches respond to mental stimuli just as much as physical ones. A stressful thought can cause your heart to race, your pupils to dilate, and your stomach to churn, not because of a lion in the bush, but because of a worry in your mind. That stress is transmitted through neural pathways that do not distinguish between real danger and imagined threat. Likewise, calming thoughts and deep breaths can signal the body to slow down, to heal, to relax, proving that our perceptions alter our physiology. But nerves alone do not complete the story. The body also speaks to the brain through hormones, chemical messengers released by glands into the bloodstream. These hormones regulate hunger, sleep, sexual desire, aggression, growth, and metabolism. They influence mood, memory, and behavior. Cortisol, the stress hormone, can weaken immune response and memory if chronically elevated. Oxytocin, sometimes called the love hormone, is released during social bonding, touch, and childbirth, creating feelings of trust and empathy. The endocrine system, like the nervous system, is a bridge, a fluid one, linking the mind with the body in both directions. Hormones don't just react to brain signals. They can influence the brain itself. Estrogen, testosterone, and thyroid hormones can modulate mood and cognition. The body's chemistry, in short, alters the brain's terrain. One of the most dramatic examples of this connection is the gut-brain axis. The human gut is lined with millions of neurons, so many that scientists sometimes refer to it as the second brain. The vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve, forms a direct communication superhighway between the brain and the gastrointestinal tract. But beyond nerves, the gut is also home to trillions of microbes that influence digestion, immunity, and even neurotransmitter production. Some strains of bacteria can impact levels of serotonin, a neurotransmitter involved in mood regulation. This has led to the startling realization that our gut flora may influence our anxiety, our depression, even our decisions. In this light, mental health becomes inseparable from diet, digestion, and internal microbiology. Pain, too, blurs the mind-body boundary. Chronic pain is not always a simple physical injury. It can persist long after the body has healed. Studies have shown that emotional trauma and psychological distress can exacerbate or even cause physical pain syndromes. Fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, and certain forms of back pain are now understood as psychosomatic, not meaning imaginary, but rather born of real neurological pathways that integrate physical and emotional information. Pain is subjective, filtered through memory, expectation, and belief. Two people can experience the same injury with vastly different levels of agony, based on how their brains interpret the signals. Placebo effects, where people feel better after taking inert pills, are not just quirks of perception. They reflect the brain's power to produce real physiological changes based on belief alone. This interconnectedness also sheds light on phenomena like psychosomatic illness, in which stress, trauma, or repressed emotions manifest as physical symptoms, headaches, fatigue, ulcers, or even paralysis. While once dismissed as hysteria, modern imaging has revealed changes in brain activity during such episodes. The body becomes a vessel for the mind's unspoken burdens. Likewise, meditation, yoga, and other mind-body practices are no longer seen as mystical arts but as tools to regulate both neural and hormonal systems. These practices modulate brain waves, lower cortisol levels, increase gray matter density, and enhance emotional resilience. The body learns peace, and the brain follows. The illusion of dualism, that the brain and body are separate, is crumbling under the weight of evidence. The self is not a ghost in a machine. It is the integration of all systems, neural, hormonal, muscular, and microbial. To heal the mind, we must listen to the body. To heal the body, we must understand the mind. In this deeply interwoven system, there are no isolated causes, no clean divisions. There is only the vast, subtle feedback loop of being alive. Chapter 10, The Phantom Within, Identity and the Self. Amid all the complexities of the human brain, its folds, circuits, and chemical dances, lies one of the most profound enigmas of existence, the self. That sense of I which persists across time and space, anchoring all our thoughts, feelings, and memories into a coherent story. But where exactly is this self located? Is it a fixed entity, a mere illusion, or an emergent phenomenon of neural computation? The journey to uncover the self is not only a scientific expedition but a philosophical pilgrimage into the heart of consciousness. For centuries, philosophers have debated the nature of identity. From Descartes' declaration, cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, to the Buddhist notion of anatta, or non-self, the self has been both revered and dismantled in thought. But neuroscience has brought new dimensions to this ancient inquiry, allowing us to peer inside the brain and witness how it constructs what we call me. Identity, as we are coming to understand, may not be a solid, unchanging object but a dynamic interplay of memory, perception, and narrative coherence woven together in real time. One of the most revealing insights into the self comes from the study of brain injuries and neurological disorders. Consider patients with dissociative identity disorder, once called multiple personality disorder. Their brains seem capable of housing entirely different personalities, each with distinct memories, behaviors, and even physiological traits. Or take Capgras delusion, where a person becomes convinced that a loved one has been replaced by an imposter. These disruptions illustrate that our sense of identity is intimately tied to how different regions of the brain communicate and verify sensory information. When that communication breaks down, the self fractures. Experiments have shown that the brain's default mode network, DMN, a constellation of interconnected regions including the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, is active when we are engaged in self-referential thought. It's what lights up when we daydream, remember our past, or plan our future. The DMN is essentially the stage upon which the play of self unfolds. When people experience ego dissolution during deep meditation or while under the influence of psychedelics, this network shows decreased activity, and the boundaries of the self seem to dissolve into a larger sense of unity or nothingness. Developmentally, the self emerges in stages. Infants display a primitive form of self-awareness, recognizing their own bodies as separate from the environment. By age 2, many children can recognize themselves in mirrors, a classic test of self-awareness. As language and memory develop, so too does the autobiographical self, the internal narrator that stitches events into a life story. This story isn't always accurate, but it's essential for making sense of our place in the world. The self, it seems, is as much a product of narrative construction as it is of biology. Culturally, the self is not uniform. In Western societies, it is often viewed as individualistic, autonomous, and bounded. In many Eastern cultures, the self is interdependent, relational, and fluid. These differences are not just philosophical, they reflect how the brain responds to social cues, how it prioritizes personal versus collective goals, and how it assigns meaning to identity. The brain's plasticity ensures that these cultural imprints are not superficial but deeply embedded in neural patterns. And then there is the question of the extended self. In our digital age, where online personas, avatars, and social media profiles shape how we are seen and how we see ourselves, the self is no longer confined to flesh and bone. The brain adapts, treating digital feedback and virtual interactions as genuine social signals. Our devices, our memories uploaded to the cloud, even our future potential as digital consciousness, all stretch the concept of self into new dimensions. Ultimately, the self may not be a thing at all but a process. An ever-changing dance of attention, memory, emotion, and context. Like a flame, it persists not because it is unchanging, but because it is continuously renewed. The phantom within is not a ghost to be exorcised but a marvel to be understood, a fleeting but powerful illusion that gives rise to meaning, agency, and the wondrous capacity to ask, "Who am I?" Chapter 11, Language and Thought, the Architecture of Inner Worlds. Language is perhaps the most transformative invention of the human mind, not simply a tool for communication but the very architecture of complex thought. With it, we can imagine the future, reflect on the past, describe impossible things, create stories, lie, persuade, and build civilizations. Without it, the richness of human culture, identity, and abstract cognition would be inconceivable. But where does language come from in the brain? How is it constructed, understood, and used? And does language merely express thought, or does it shape it? At the neurological level, language relies on a vast and coordinated network of brain regions. Most famously, Broca's area, located in the left frontal lobe, is associated with speech production, while Wernicke's area, in the left temporal lobe, is crucial for comprehension. These two areas are linked by a bundle of nerve fibers called the arcuate fasciculus, allowing for fluid communication between the ability to understand words and the ability to produce them. Damage to Broca's area leads to difficulty in forming sentences, a condition known as Broca's aphasia, while damage to Wernicke's area results in fluent but meaningless speech. Together, they illustrate how delicate and specialized the machinery of language truly is. Yet language processing is not confined to these classical areas alone. Imaging studies show that understanding metaphors, sarcasm, or emotional tones activates a broader set of regions, including parts of the right hemisphere, the limbic system, and even motor areas, suggesting that language is deeply embodied. When you read or hear the word run, your motor cortex may simulate the act of running. When you hear a metaphor like a rough day, your somatosensory cortex subtly lights up, as though touching something textured. The brain doesn't merely decode language, it lives it. Language also reveals the incredible efficiency of the brain. When we speak, we rarely plan our sentences in full before beginning. Instead, the brain works in real time, predicting words, monitoring grammar, interpreting feedback, and adjusting course mid-flight. It is a dance of millisecond coordination between auditory systems, memory retrieval, vocal muscles, and semantic control. The miracle is not just that we speak, but that we speak so effortlessly. But language is not simply a mirror of thought, it may be its scaffolding. The theory of linguistic relativity, often associated with the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, suggests that the language we speak can influence how we perceive and categorize the world. For example, languages that assign gender to nouns, like Spanish or German, may cause speakers to unconsciously associate certain objects with masculine or feminine traits. Speakers of languages with more precise color terminology can distinguish shades others might lump together. Even our sense of time, space, and agency can be subtly nudged by linguistic structures. The brain, shaped by the language it uses, sees through that lens in turn. Moreover, language allows us to create inner worlds. Inner speech, that silent voice in your head narrating, reflecting, debating, is a product of linguistic thinking. When children first acquire language, their private speech is externalized, they talk to themselves aloud. Over time, it becomes internalized, turning into thought itself. The ability to reason, plan, evaluate, and reflect is scaffolded by this inner dialogue. When you say to yourself, "I should remember to buy milk," that voice is not a passive echo, it's the engine of cognition. Culturally, language is a repository of shared knowledge and identity. Each language encodes generations of experience, metaphors rooted in environment, and values embedded in grammar. The brain's capacity to learn language, particularly in childhood, is astounding. A newborn is born with the ability to distinguish all the sounds of all the world's languages. By the end of the first year, the brain has already specialized, tuning itself to the phonetic sounds of the language it hears most. This neural pruning ensures efficiency, but it also means that learning a second language later in life is more difficult, though not impossible. Bilingual and multilingual individuals offer a window into how language reshapes cognition. Studies show that speaking multiple languages can enhance cognitive flexibility, improve executive control, and delay the onset of dementia. The bilingual brain constantly manages two linguistic systems, switching between them with remarkable precision. In doing so, it develops a strengthened prefrontal cortex, which governs attention, inhibition, and decision-making. In the end, language is not simply what we speak, it is what we are. It forms the boundary between self and world, the tool through which we reach others, and the medium through which we think about life itself. To study language in the brain is to glimpse the very infrastructure of human possibility. The symbols and syntax that built pyramids, launched rockets, composed symphonies, and whispered lullabies into the dark. The mind, in many ways, is a cathedral made of words, and language is the stone from which it is carved. Chapter 12, Artificial Minds, Can Machines Think? From the earliest days of computation, the idea that machines might one day replicate or even surpass human thought has ignited both awe and fear. The dream, or nightmare, of artificial intelligence is rooted in the human brain itself, a biological machine of such intricate sophistication that it serves as both the inspiration and the benchmark for all synthetic minds. As we engineer algorithms that learn, adapt, and mimic human reasoning, we are not merely creating tools, we are edging closer to confronting the nature of intelligence itself. The first seeds of artificial minds were sown with simple logic gates, electronic switches that mirror the on-off behavior of neurons. From there, early pioneers like Alan Turing proposed frameworks for thinking machines, abstract constructs capable of universal computation. Turing's famous question, "Can machines think?" framed the issue not in terms of machinery but in behavior. If a machine could convincingly emulate human responses, he argued, might it not be said to think? Modern artificial intelligence began to blossom in the mid-20th century, but it was not until the 21st century that exponential increases in processing power, data availability, and algorithmic complexity allowed AI to cross important thresholds. Deep learning, in particular, introduced artificial neural networks, computational systems loosely modeled on the brain, that can recognize images, generate human-like text, and even simulate creativity. These systems do not replicate consciousness, but they perform tasks that once required uniquely human cognition. However, there is a chasm between mimicry and understanding. AI systems today do not think as we do. They do not possess awareness, intuition, or subjective experience. A neural network can generate poetry, but it does not feel the rhythm of language. A chatbot may simulate empathy, but it does not know sorrow. Their intelligence is alien, data-driven, statistical, and mechanical. They are mirrors of our behavior, not minds. And yet, as machines become more complex, so do our philosophical dilemmas. Can intelligence be separated from consciousness? If a machine convincingly displays emotion, does it matter whether it feels? Is understanding merely a pattern of symbols, or does it require something deeper, a presence behind the processing? These are not merely technical questions, they are moral and metaphysical ones. There are practical implications, too. AI is already influencing healthcare, finance, warfare, and education. Autonomous systems are making decisions once reserved for human judgment. With each advance, we must wrestle with issues of trust, accountability, and control. When algorithms operate as black boxes, how do we ensure fairness or transparency? Who is responsible when an autonomous system errs? What rights, if any, might a conscious machine one day claim? The question of machine minds forces us to re-examine our own cognition. What does it mean to think, to know, to be aware? If we ever succeed in building a conscious machine, it will not just be a triumph of engineering, it will be a mirror held up to humanity. For in constructing an artificial mind, we reveal the mysteries of our own. Chapter 13, The Brain and Decision-Making. Every moment of life, from the simplest task to the grandest ambition, involves decisions. Some are unconscious and automatic, like blinking when something nears your eye. Others are complex and weighty, like choosing a career or ending a relationship. Behind each decision, whether trivial or life-changing, lies a sophisticated orchestra of brain activity that governs judgment, risk evaluation, moral reasoning, and self-control. To understand decision-making is to peer into one of the most fascinating and consequential functions of the human brain. At the center of this process is the prefrontal cortex, often called the brain's executive control center. This region is responsible for weighing evidence, projecting future consequences, inhibiting impulsive responses, and integrating emotional and rational information. It's what allows humans to delay gratification, to think ahead, to imagine different outcomes before acting. In fact, damage to the prefrontal cortex, as famously illustrated in the case of Phineas Gage, can result in drastic changes to personality, poor judgment, and an inability to make responsible decisions despite preserved intelligence. But decision-making is not purely logical. Emotions play a critical role, and this is where the amygdala, insula, and anterior cingulate cortex come into play. These areas register emotional responses, especially those related to risk, fear, and uncertainty. For instance, the amygdala helps alert us to danger or potential loss, while the insula gives us that gut feeling when something seems off. Rather than being a hindrance to reason, emotions act as vital signals that influence and shape decisions, especially in situations of moral conflict or personal significance. Neuroeconomics, a field combining neuroscience, psychology, and economics, has revealed just how much our brains are prone to biases. The dopaminergic reward system, which includes the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area, is deeply involved in evaluating potential rewards. This circuitry explains why we might choose short-term pleasure over long-term benefit, why we overestimate the value of immediate outcomes, and why gambling, addiction, or impulsive shopping can hijack the brain's decision systems. The delayed discounting phenomenon, where people prefer smaller rewards now over larger rewards later, is a vivid example of how biology can override logic. Moral decision-making brings in yet another layer of complexity. The medial prefrontal cortex, along with the temporoparietal junction and precuneus, becomes active when we contemplate fairness, justice, or harm to others. Dilemmas like the trolley problem, where one must choose between saving many lives or sparing one, reveal how the brain juggles utilitarian calculations against emotional empathy. Interestingly, people with damage to emotional regions may make colder, more utilitarian decisions, highlighting just how intertwined morality is with emotion. Cognitive flexibility is essential for adaptive decision-making. The ability to adjust one's choices in response to changing environments or new information relies on healthy communication between the prefrontal cortex and basal ganglia. This flexibility allows us to learn from mistakes, update our strategies, and avoid repeating bad decisions. On the flip side, conditions like obsessive-compulsive disorder or addiction often involve rigid decision patterns, where the brain's normal flexibility is compromised. In our digital age, understanding decision-making is more relevant than ever. From social media scrolling to online shopping, our choices are increasingly nudged by algorithms that exploit cognitive biases. The brain's decision systems, evolved for survival in nature, are being tested in environments flooded with artificial stimuli, instant feedback, and psychological manipulation. Knowing how these systems work gives us a better chance at reclaiming autonomy and making decisions that truly serve our values and goals. Decision-making, at its core, is not just about logic or emotion, it's about the conversation between the two. It's where biology meets philosophy, where neurons give rise to ethics, and where the brain becomes the compass of the self. In every choice we make, the brain whispers its predictions, warnings, and desires, and we, as conscious beings, must listen, interpret, and act. Chapter 14: The Brain and Music. Music, in all its forms and rhythms, has a profound effect on the human brain. From lullabies that soothe infants to symphonies that stir emotions in packed concert halls, music has been with humanity since the dawn of culture. But the experience of music is not just emotional or cultural, it is also deeply neurological. The brain does not passively receive music, it actively participates, reacts, predicts, and even moves in synchrony with it. Music, in fact, might be one of the most comprehensive stimuli for the brain, engaging more regions simultaneously than almost any other activity known. When we hear music, the first contact point is the auditory cortex, located in the temporal lobe. This region processes sound elements like pitch, volume, and timbre. But music is more than sound, it is structure, anticipation, and emotional arc. As such, the prefrontal cortex becomes involved, helping the brain anticipate what comes next based on rhythm or melody. This predictive element is key. Part of what we find pleasurable in music is the tension and release of those predictions, when a song surprises us or resolves a note just as we expected it to. Emotionally, music lights up the limbic system, particularly the amygdala and nucleus accumbens. These structures are involved in the brain's reward pathways and emotional responses. When we listen to a song that moves us, it's often accompanied by a release of dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in pleasure from food, love, or even drugs. In fact, brain imaging shows similar activity in people listening to their favorite songs as in those experiencing a euphoric high. Music, quite literally, can be a drug. But music doesn't just influence emotions, it also engages the motor cortex, even when we're not moving. The beat of a drum or the rhythm of a melody can cause neurons to fire as though we are tapping along. This is why music so easily makes people want to dance, or why patients with Parkinson's disease, who struggle with movement, often find temporary fluidity when walking to a rhythm. Music can entrain the brain, pulling it into synchrony and helping coordinate physical action with auditory cues. On a cognitive level, music activates memory circuits, particularly the hippocampus. A familiar song can transport us back years, reviving vivid scenes and emotions in an instant. This power has been harnessed in therapies for Alzheimer's patients, who may struggle with names and faces but can sing lyrics from decades past. Music, in this way, preserves access to emotional and autobiographical memories even when other routes are blocked. Moreover, the corpus callosum, the bundle of nerves connecting the brain's two hemispheres, is often more developed in musicians, suggesting that playing or practicing music enhances communication between logic and creativity. Studies have shown that musicians tend to have higher levels of neuroplasticity, better working memory, and sharper auditory discrimination skills. These benefits are not limited to professionals. Even brief periods of musical training in childhood can yield lifelong cognitive advantages. Music also engages language centers in the brain, particularly Broca's and Wernicke's areas, which process structure and meaning. This overlap may explain why musical training improves verbal skills, or why people with aphasia, an inability to speak due to brain injury, can sometimes sing words they cannot otherwise say. Melody and rhythm appear to offer alternate neurological pathways for expression when traditional ones are damaged. Finally, music plays a role in social bonding. Singing, drumming, or moving together in rhythm can increase feelings of trust and cooperation. Oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, is often released during communal musical experiences, from concerts to choir practice. In this sense, music has always been more than art. It is a tool for unity, empathy, and shared emotional resonance. The brain and music share a beautifully reciprocal relationship. Music shapes the brain, and the brain interprets music. Whether it's the lull of a lullaby, the grandeur of a classical piece, or the raw energy of a tribal drumbeat, music touches every part of who we are, emotionally, cognitively, physically, and socially. It is, perhaps, the most universal language, spoken fluently by every human brain, across every culture and time. Chapter 15, The Brain in Love, the Chemistry of Attachment. Love, so often romanticized in poems, novels, and songs, is not merely an abstract emotion or poetic idea. It is a real, biological phenomenon deeply rooted in the chemistry and circuitry of the human brain. While it can feel transcendent, intoxicating, or even spiritual, love is ultimately a complex interplay of neurochemicals, evolutionary imperatives, and brain regions working in synchrony to forge bonds, foster attachment, and sustain relationships across time. When a person falls in love, their brain lights up in distinct ways. Using functional MRI scans, neuroscientists have observed that intense romantic attraction activates areas rich in dopamine, especially the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and the caudate nucleus. These regions are central components of the brain's reward system, which is also activated by addictive substances like cocaine or nicotine. Dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, motivation, and desire, floods the system during the early stages of romantic love, creating feelings of euphoria, obsession, and even withdrawal when separated from the beloved. But romantic love is not driven by dopamine alone. Another powerful player is oxytocin, often called the love hormone or cuddle chemical. Oxytocin is released during physical intimacy, such as hugging, kissing, or sex, and plays a crucial role in deepening emotional bonds. It fosters trust, empathy, and a sense of closeness, which are essential for the long-term attachment that relationships, and particularly parenting, require. In mothers, oxytocin surges during childbirth and breastfeeding, helping establish the mother-infant bond. In both men and women, higher oxytocin levels have been linked to greater relationship satisfaction, stronger monogamous ties, and more cooperative behavior within couples. Closely related is vasopressin, a hormone more prominent in males, which also contributes to long-term bonding and pair formation. Animal studies, particularly in prairie voles, a species known for lifelong monogamy, have shown that vasopressin is crucial for maintaining partner preference and guarding against rivals. When vasopressin receptors are blocked in these voles, their monogamous tendencies disappear. Similar mechanisms are believed to operate in humans, though with greater complexity due to our social and cultural layers. Another fascinating aspect of love is the way it alters cognition. Early-stage infatuation can result in reduced activity in areas of the brain associated with judgment and critical thinking, such as the prefrontal cortex. This suspension of disbelief may explain why people in love often idealize their partners, overlooking flaws or making irrational choices. Evolutionarily, this cognitive fog might have helped our ancestors commit to partners long enough to raise offspring, increasing the odds of survival. Over time, as passionate love evolves into companionate love, the neurochemical landscape shifts. The intensity of dopamine-driven desire may fade, but deeper bonds emerge, supported by oxytocin, vasopressin, and endorphins. These substances create a sense of comfort, stability, and emotional safety. Long-term love activates regions such as the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, associated with emotional regulation and empathy. This neurochemical transformation is essential for maintaining lasting partnerships that can withstand life's inevitable stresses and changes. The brain in love is also attuned to rejection and heartbreak. The same reward centers activated during love are also implicated in emotional pain when love is lost. Rejection or betrayal can trigger withdrawal-like symptoms, as dopamine and oxytocin levels crash, and the anterior insula and dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, regions linked to physical pain, light up. This overlap between social pain and physical pain highlights how deeply wired love and attachment are into the human experience. Ultimately, the brain's love circuitry is an intricate fusion of biology and meaning. While driven by ancient chemical mechanisms evolved to ensure reproduction and survival, love also becomes a narrative we construct, a source of joy, meaning, and transcendence. Whether in the ecstatic highs of new romance or the quiet comfort of lifelong companionship, love is not just an emotion, it is a brain state, a bond, and a bridge between two minds. Chapter 16: What is Thought? Decoding the Architecture of Thinking. What is thought? It is a question that seems deceptively simple, yet it plunges us into one of the deepest mysteries of the mind. Every day, every hour, every moment, we are immersed in a continuous stream of thoughts, images, memories, plans, fears, daydreams, and calculations that rise and fall within our consciousness like waves in the ocean. But what exactly is a thought? How does the brain generate it? And why does it feel so natural to think, even though the underlying process is astonishingly complex? At its most fundamental level, a thought is a pattern of neural activity. It is not a static object inside the brain, but rather a dynamic interaction between billions of neurons communicating via electrical impulses and chemical signals. These neurons fire in synchronized patterns, forming networks that encode representations of objects, people, events, and abstract ideas. When we think, we are activating these networks. Replaying memories, simulating outcomes, evaluating situations, or exploring new possibilities. Different types of thought engage different regions of the brain. The prefrontal cortex, particularly the dorsolateral and ventromedial regions, plays a central role in conscious thought, reasoning, problem-solving, and planning. This is where abstract thinking, self-reflection, and decision-making often take shape. The parietal lobes assist with spatial reasoning and numerical thought, while the temporal lobes contribute language, memory, and meaning. The default mode network, which becomes active during rest or introspection, is deeply involved in spontaneous thought, such as mind-wandering and imagining future scenarios. Thought is not a singular process, but a vast ecosystem of cognitive functions. There is convergent thinking, where the mind focuses on narrowing down options to find the correct answer, like solving a math problem. There is divergent thinking, where the brain generates multiple possibilities, essential for creativity and brainstorming. There is metacognition, or thinking about thinking, where we evaluate and monitor our own mental processes. And there is rumination, where the mind loops endlessly over the same worries, sometimes leading to anxiety or depression. One of the most fascinating aspects of thought is that it often occurs beneath our awareness. Unconscious thought processes guide much of what we do, automatic behaviors, emotional reactions, even intuitive judgments, before we become consciously aware of them. The brain is constantly sifting through sensory input, past experiences, and stored knowledge, generating predictions and preparing responses. By the time a conscious thought arises, it is often the result of vast subterranean processing that has already occurred in the background. Language plays a crucial role in shaping thought. Many thoughts arise in the form of inner speech, where we silently talk to ourselves to organize ideas or rehearse actions. But thought is not limited to words. Visual thinkers use images, spatial maps, and mental simulations. Musical thinkers may imagine melodies or rhythms. Emotions themselves can be a form of thought, complex reactions that convey judgment and meaning without words. Memory, too, is inextricable from thought. Every idea, reflection, or plan is built upon layers of memory, episodic, semantic, procedural, that the brain retrieves, rearranges, and reconfigures in real time. The hippocampus helps consolidate these memories and supports the mental construction of scenes and timelines. When we imagine future possibilities, we are essentially reassembling fragments of the past in novel configurations, a process known as perspective thinking. Even perception itself is a kind of thought. The brain does not passively receive information, it interprets, infers, and reconstructs it. What we see, hear, and feel is shaped not just by raw sensory data, but by our expectations, beliefs, and prior experiences. This interpretive act is one of the most powerful forms of thought. The transformation of the outer world into a coherent, meaningful internal experience. Thought is also intimately connected with emotion, motivation, and desire. Our goals shape what we pay attention to. Our fears influence what we imagine. Our hopes sculpt the futures we consider. The idea that thought is purely rational is a myth. Emotion is woven into every strand of thinking, giving color and urgency to even the most logical chain of reasoning. In essence, thought is the internal engine of the self. It allows us to solve problems, tell stories, imagine new worlds, understand others, and reflect on who we are. It is at once the most personal and the most universal of human capacities. And though science has made great strides in mapping the brain's structures and functions, the precise way that neural activity gives rise to the vivid, flowing experience of thought remains one of the greatest frontiers of neuroscience and philosophy.